Welcome to All the Year Round, a seasonal monthly podcast about 19th century British and Irish literature and culture. I'm one of your hosts, Emma Probert, researcher of Jane Austen, Elizabeth Gaskell and the Novel of Manners. And shortly we'll be joined by Dr. Hayley Flynn, an avid delver of 1860s periodicals and depictions of dreams. Today we're heading out on our second road trip this summer to visit the Symington archive, which is one of the largest collections of surviving corsets from the 19th century onwards. The wonderful Sarah Nichol, the curator of many Leicestershire collections, including the fashion collection, pulled some items from storage for us to examine and shared her extensive expertise with us, so a huge thank you to Sarah. And throughout this episode, you'll also hear me make reference to a book titled Foundations of Fashion, the Symington Corsetry Collection from 1860 to 1990, which I was able to get second-hand off of eBay, sold by John Liddell, who was the head of costume at Scottish Opera for many years. He has a catalogue of over 100 titles that he's selling on, some of them practical books about pattern cutting and construction, and some of them are about costume history. If you're interested in perusing his list, we've put the eBay link into the description. Now, let's settle into the episode. First, let's have a little bit of background. In 1830, James Symington joined his elder brother William, travelling from Scotland to Leicester to establish himself as a tailor and draper next to his brother's tea shop. William quickly became successful and moved out of his tea shop and sold it on to Mr. and Mrs. Gold and their daughter Sarah, who was a skilled staymaker. Within 3 years of their falling into one another's proximity, for love or convenience, James and Sarah married. Their first child was born in 1837, and 19 years later, like his father before him, Robert Symington left home. Robert went to seek his fortunes in America. He didn't find them there, but he found his family's legacy. In 1856, he sent back 3 sewing machines made by Isaac Merritt Singer, who would go on to found the worldwide enterprise of Singer Sewing Machines, and so Market Harborough had one of the first mechanised corset factories in England. Their prospects grew exponentially, from Sarah Symington and 3 seamstresses working out of a cottage to factories in Leicester, Rugby, Ipswich, Sudbury, Liverpool, Manchester, Blackwood and Peterborough. At their height, the factories expanded even further to Ireland, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. A change in ownership for the business in 1967 diminished the family's input and power. The historic Symington collection of 1,300 garments was presented to the Leicestershire County Council's Museum Service in 1980, and over the next decade, parts of the Market Harborough factory closed down and were sold off, finally closing its doors for the last time in May 1990. So you might be wondering, if they were such a big competitor in the market, how come I've never heard of Symingtons? Well, although they produced some of their own designs, like the Liberty bodice, a vest for children which became a basic household item in the first half of the 20th century, and the pretty housemaid corset, a corset specifically designed to be the cheapest, best quality for domestic workers, which has become somewhat of a notable item amongst fashion historians. A lot of the work the factories took on were commissions from other companies, like Marks and Spencer's, Liberty, and its final big contract in 1957, Christian Dior. So we're really excited to look at some of these beautiful surviving pieces from Symington's and their competitors, and we start off with some intrigue over the Symington's myth.
They said that they were the first to use Singer sewing machines in a mass manufacturing setting. I don't know whether they were the first. They were certainly one of the first.
One of the early adopters.
Yes.
It's possible that they could have been. I had like a lot of, when you think about something for more than 5 seconds and you have to sort of unpick something. And now that you said it, I am thinking, because Robert was supposed to go to, America to seek his fortune, and then he shipped through back, and I was like, maybe I'm just not understanding the exchange rates, maybe I'm not understanding shipping rates, but I was like, 3 machines, isn't a machine quite expensive?
Well, yes,
and isn't shipping
Singer
expensive?
had the whole hire purchase agreement because people couldn't actually afford to buy them outright. So yeah, they wouldn't have been cheap.
Yeah, and in my head I was like, I need to have a word with Robert and go back into the past, because I need to know. I was just like,
why 3?
Yeah, why 3?
I think 1, because if you didn't know whether they worked or not. I mean, the ladies that worked, because this was at a time when it was his mum Sarah Symington, who was making corsets. They're all made to measure. So it was the boys that did the mass manufacturing side. When it handed down to them, they started the mass manufacturing up. So they didn't sew, but what they were good at was business.
While we were working on one of our previous episodes on the Victorian seaside, we got to thinking, while going for a dip in the sea, how did people who wore corsets stay cool in the hot weather or playing sports? From the massive collection of surviving garments, Sarah pulled a few choice items to help us answer the question.
We actually have two ventilated.
Fantastic.
Both pretty, well, they're not identical, because I was busy telling a student one day that it was only a single layer of cotil at the top, and then felt it and said, oh no, this one's not. So they are slightly different, which actually in itself is really interesting, because obviously as they were producing it, they must have kept evolving with it. And then because they realised that a single layer of cotil was as good as a double layer.
You can always mark it as like, less fabric on your body.
Yeah. So the ventilated was for ventilation. So it was for women who were going abroad, but still needed to keep that European fashionable shape.
Yes.
Which obviously, as you more than likely know, is far more, it's not to do with vanity, it's to do with social standing.
Of course.
Obviously, if you're going abroad to tropical regions, it's a lot warmer over there than it is here. So they created this. We do have one. We have half a corset that's the other way round. So there's just a centre section there, a little bit on the bust and a little bit on the hip, but the rest is skeletal. So I can go and get that one.
That would be great to see. Cause this is very familiar to me, because like I say, on my travels around the internet, you know, I have it in the book. I have a section of you on bargain hunt.
Oh no,
where you were displaying this one as well. So the second I saw it, I was like, we have to go. We have to see this in person. But this is really beautiful, and I can imagine that. Oh, it's. You know, I always get a little bit taken aback because it is smaller than I would have expected. What about you, Hayley?
Yeah, I think actually what I was just thinking is the actual, because it says 1895. So is it the cane? Does it say on that note there? That
it is cane in here. So boning wise, you started with whalebone,
Of course.
Yeah. And then whalebone was always difficult to find, difficult to get hold of. I think the prices fluctuated. The quality of it fluctuated. So everybody was constantly looking for other ways that you could bone a corset. So you get a variety of different types of boning, all at the same time, unfortunately, because it would be really useful if they just stopped using one and then used another for dating.
yeah, that would be far convenient.
It would be far more convenient, but they don't. So you get watch spring steel. So you see that advertised a lot, which is just a really fine, thin steel. You get a flat steel that's covered in like a linen, which helps to stop rust coming through.
Yes, that was always something I thought about when I originally found out, you know, as a young person, about corsets and the fact they were steel. I was just like, how do you wash it? Like, particularly if you're like scrubbing it, that it must rust really easily and it'd be creaky. And
well, the first thing is you never wore the corset next to your skin.
Of course.
You always wore your white linen underneath that was washable, so that got washed more regularly. If you could afford it, it was linen or it was cotton. Linen is better. It wicks away moisture a lot better than cotton does. And then obviously you'd have had your corset on and then you'd have worn your clothes over the top. So the corset itself probably didn't get dirty as such. It would have got moisture. Yeah, moisture would have seeped into it. And I think we've just got to forget how we launder clothes today. And I think there would have been a lot more airing out.
Yeah.
And then just sponging. Rather than
like doing a full wash every time. Yeah. Because that's something that's a lot easier for us now. You just sort of bung it in the washing machine, set it away for an hour or two.
Away and come back.
Come back, hang it up, done.
Yeah, it wasn't like that then.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about the amount of labour that one would have to do at the time and just how warm you would get as well, like scrubbing things, hanging things up, pulling things down.
Yeah. No central heating then.
Also, yes. Oh, isn't it lovely to live in the present day with central heating?
You really think about it.
Yeah, especially after last winter.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Trying to cut back, and it's just
Yeah.
like, oh no, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to an episode of The Thing About Austen where it was talking about in Sense and Sensibility, you know, Marianne, she goes out after that break with Willoughby, you know, she gets, you know, it's raining, she's running around, and she comes home, and how many people are like, oh, it's so unrealistic that she would get sick from that. And I was like, well, not really. She's got wet feet, she's like soaked through, so it's not just that, it's gone through layers of her. They're not in the best financial situation, the Dashwoods. I mean, they're okay, they're in quite a nice little cottage. They're not in a mansion, but they are in a cottage. And, you know, then they didn't have the fire going, so then they've got to start the fire back up. So every single moment she's just cold and wet, and there's no central heating. When she has to go to bed upstairs, there's not a fire in that room either. So they've tried to like warm her up as much as possible, but it actually makes quite a lot of sense that she's getting ill off of it. Yeah.
I wonder what kind of corset she was wearing.
I also wonder that.
They would have been corded at that point, so far more cording. So they would have still had a corset, and it would have still been, probably to our minds, quite restrictive.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't have had this, what's called a split busk down the front, so that busk wouldn't have opened, so it would have been one set.
Yeah, that's the one you have to be put in by somebody else. Yeah, again, I've read the whole thing last night. I was like, I've got to be up on things for Sarah.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was looking at as well, actually, which is interesting because I'd never thought about that before. But when they do change from being kind of back fastening to front fastening, then suddenly different people can wear them because it's hard to do that on yourself.
Yeah, you can do them up yourself.
Yeah.
I like that as a kind of movement of just being like, I can get dressed in the morning, I don't need a family member, don't need a servant, don't need anybody, you know, you're far more in control of just like your own body and your own dress. And I think that's like quite a substantial moment.
Yeah, I think there was quite a to do about that though as well.
I can imagine so.
So the split busk, it was at one of the shows in about 1852.
Yes.
It was, yes. You see it in mass manufactured corsets from the 1860s. You tend to see split busks coming in.
Yeah, no, we were also poring over the advertisement they had for the Great Exhibition of all these hygienic corsets that had like proper ventilation because of the busking. You know, you weren't like fully laced up. There's movement there, so that was also interesting to think about as something that you would advertise as well. Just being like, we're at Crystal Palace, and here are our wares. Here is our stall, and you know that's the moment of concern that they're looking at. In the time period, which I thought was also quite enlightening, really.
I wonder how effective they actually were, and I'm kind of wondering that with this as well, because I feel like if I was in a very hot country, I would still be very warm wearing that, even though it is ventilated. I mean, the canes run fairly close together, so
yeah, there's not a terrific lot of ventilation. Also, I don't know how good it would have been at ventilating, because that's something I've not been able to try. I have worn a corset like this.
Oh, yes.
And they aren't uncomfortable.
That's good to know.
I think everybody thinks tight lacing when they think about corsets.
Yeah. Yes. Hayley, Englishwoman's Domestic Magazine. You're a big fan of the publication.
Yes, I am. So there was the infamous debate about corsets in the Englishwoman's Domestic Magazine, which some people debate kind of what exactly happened with that, because Samuel Beeton edited the magazine. He's one of the editors of the magazine, and some people think that he actually started it, or he was participating in it himself anonymously. So there was a letter written into the Conversation page, which was like everyone could write into that, kind of about the terrible new straight lacing thing and how that was so dangerous for young women, and a mother who was horrified that her daughter had been straight laced into a corset while she was at boarding school, I think she was. And then loads of people wrote in about corsets, kind of either debating that no, they're not terrible, it's fine, and or saying, yeah, this is, why have we allowed this to happen, and why are women wearing these? And actually occasionally a couple of men wrote in saying that they liked to wear corsets, and could anybody recommend corsets that would be good for them. So it turned into just like, it came out every month, and it was ongoing for ages, just this like debate about corsets and whether they were terrible or not. There has actually been some suggestion that some of it shouldn't be taken as kind of how to say, not historically accurate, but as a fair representation of how people felt about corsets, because reading some of the entries, there might be an edge of fetishization about the corsets to that, and just kind of trying to get responses from the magazine for that purpose, and instead of it being a serious conversation about corsets and
how they were really used.
Yeah,
I mean, that's always what you're looking for in a publication, isn't it? You're looking to get as many people coming back and reading.
Yeah.
And I suppose being scandalised, you know.
Yeah, I mean, triggering a scandalous debate was obviously great for business, because you have to buy the next instalment of the magazine to find out who's arguing with you next. Like checking a Twitter thread of arguments or something, I guess.
Something I spend far too much of my time doing.
Yeah. So, one of the questions that we wanted to ask was, because corsets, and I think actually now when you say corsets to people, they do generally have quite a bad reputation. People think of them as being just like really uncomfortable. It's something that was inflicted upon women, trying to uphold unrealistic beauty standards of having a really tiny waist, and potentially that kind of like symbol of patriarchy as well. Do you think they have been misrepresented, though, in your opinion?
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because I think they sort of still are, because they've perpetuated this. Of course, it's really uncomfortable. I think probably compared to how we feel and what we wear today, which is not constricting at all, then you will probably feel that they were a little bit more uncomfortable than what we wear. But underwire bras aren't particularly comfortable either.
Something my boss said the other day when I said I was coming here.
Yeah. I mean, and you get some that are more comfortable than others. And I think you would have got that with corsets. You would have found a shape, a style that was comfortable for you, more comfortable for you. I think we also have to remember that there wasn't anything else. So there weren't bras. There was nothing to support you. And corsets did support, they didn't suspend, which is what bras do. So there's none of that weight on your shoulders.
Yeah.
They supported your front, but they also supported your back. And also the weight of your clothes was a lot heavier than the weight of the clothes that we wear today. So the corset would have acted more like a scaffolding, so it would have dissipated that weight. So I think you have to put everything in context to what else was going on at that time.
Yeah.
The whole small waist thing is an on-running debate. I can only talk about what we have in the Symington archive. So Symingtons were a mass manufacturer from around 1860. The corsets that we have in the collection are not only Symingtons, but they are other manufacturers as well that Symingtons bought in to have a look at what everybody else was doing. And we also have corsets that, although don't have Symington's labelling, possibly were manufactured by Symingtons because they made on licence for a lot of other companies. The ones in the collection that we have 2 18-inch waists. Only 2. The rest tend to be 22, 24. But you would have worn a corset that was 2 inches smaller than your waist measurement.
Right.
So you would always had a gap at the back. You would never have done your corset up closed.
Oh, okay.
So a 22-inch would have been worn by somebody 24 or even 26, depending on your shape, your general shape. If you're a more curvy figure, more of an hourglass figure with flesh that manipulates, you can tend to be able to get your waist down smaller, more comfortably, than somebody who is more athletic and solid. So if it's all muscle, you can't squash it. No.
You can try your best, but you're not going to make much progress.
You're not. And of course, it's do tend to work better on people who have flesh to manipulate.
Well, I was sort of like digging around, and we were talking about sort of smaller sizes and sort of the wasp waist earlier. And one thing that I was looking at was some people seem to have thought that one of the reasons why we have such small sizes surviving is because it was stock that wasn't. Thank you so much, Haley. It was sort of surviving stock that hadn't been sold. So potentially one of the reasons why we have the smaller sizes, because those were just the ones that weren't as popular and weren't sold. So I suppose like the modern day equivalent is it's near impossible to find like a size 14 or 16 when you go into the local shops. But
because
like
they sell out.
Exactly, but it'd be much easier to find like a size 4 or a size 22 or something like that.
I think also when you're buying one in to have a look at, when you're wanting to keep one off the line, or for some reason they kept these, we're really not sure why. They were apparently found in a cupboard in the late 40s.
That's always too exciting. You're like, what if I open a cupboard one day and I find something amazing?
So these tend to be between 22 and 24 inches, but smaller sizes look nicer.
True.
Take less fabric.
Yes, if you're mocking something up as well.
But we do have on one of them, and I need to re-find it because the details that we have on these were written by the gentleman that looked after the archive whilst he was working at Symington.
Is that Christopher Page?
Yes. A lot of it you do have to, it's a very good starting point.
Fantastic.
You can't take it all as read, but it's a very good starting point. And one of them was mass manufactured up to the waist size of 36 inches. Now, you wouldn't mass manufacture a corset if you weren't selling it.
Yeah.
You've also, I mean, it's the same with the clothes. A lot of the clothes that we have, a lot of the dresses that we have from that period are all quite small. But you could also look at it as the fact that they were kept for sentimental value. They were kept because they could. They didn't have to pass them on, or they didn't have to remake them, or they were too small to be remade into something else. But also because there's sentimental value attached to them, and that sentiment normally happens when you're younger. So that, 18, 19, 20, went to your first ball, or you met somebody, that sort of thing. When you're at your smallest.
Yes.
But if you had 8 children, you're not going to be the same shape.
Yeah, it's something I always think when I look at, one of the last pictures of Elizabeth Gaskell that, was ever taken. Because, by the time she died, she was not the smallest woman you've ever seen. And, you can see her and she's sat with sort of like these massive folds, and she's clearly wearing like a very structured corset. And I always look at it and think, I think I could get into that. So like there must have been something for me.
There was also a lot of optical illusion going on. If you've got a big skirt and big sleeves, then it makes your waist look smaller.
Yeah.
And it was all about proportions.
I have a really weird aside here, which was I was looking at a different YouTube video again when I was on my trawl through the internet for corsetry things. And I was looking at photographs, and people were talking about how like photographs have been manipulated to make things. So if you looked at the background, there were like weird curves.
Some of them have been done really well.
Some of them
I've seen
not.
some, not so good. Photoshop is not new. And you could do a lot in the darkroom as well.
Yeah, because that one really, because I was just like, because when you see, a person as a photograph, your mind, I think, automatically goes to, this must just be what this person looks like. And it wasn't until someone sort of picked up on these things, I was like, oh, they're actually, quite average size. They're nowhere near as small as this waist is trying to depict itself, because it's sort of like altered it back to the way that it was. And that's
the
interesting.
fashion does change that with corsets over time as well, doesn't it? Because I can't remember what year this is, and I'm probably going to have to check it and put in the description. But when the skirts became kind of all the way around, what would you call it? Like flounce?
With the crinoline.
Yeah.
Yes,
then
around the 1860s.
Your waist did look smaller because the rest of your body is being pushed out. So and also one of the things that I wanted to ask you about anyway was with the advertisements for corsets, they always have that like wasp waist, very very tiny, impossibly so in a lot of adverts, look to them.
They're all drawn, aren't they? So yes,
and a lot of people have said, I noticed, that if that were true, if people were really trying to get their waist so tiny, then the collections would show that. So I was going to ask you, in the collection here, are there any really tiny ones?
2 18-inch within this collection. I think also, there were people that, same as now, there are always going to be people that take things to the extreme.
Yeah.
And there are people that are naturally got a small waist compared to everything else.
Exactly.
And of course, it would have been fantastic for them. If you. yeah, the smaller the corset, the more delicate it is, the more brittle it is, because all of those bones are going into a point, a very small point around the waistline.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether there's an argument to say that maybe they didn't survive those really tiny ones because the more you wore them, they just disintegrated. I don't know.
Yeah,
I am clearly making that up now.
I was going to say, but it sounds like it could be true. It's a bit like, because I remember, I'm thinking off the top of my head, because one of my questions was about the Pretty Housemaid, because that one was very specifically marketed, and I even saw sort of additional ones saying, this is really strong, it's really, really durable.
Year's guarantee.
Exactly.
It's not the only one that Symington did that had a year's guarantee.
That was the guarantee corset, I believe.
Yes, and there was a couple more as well.
Oh wow, they were really ahead of their time with that 1 year warranty.
Their marketing was very, very good.
And you can see immediately on the advertisement for that cheapest is also there alongside strongest. So were the ones with the guarantees generally marketed for people who wouldn't have as much money to spend?
That I don't know.
I'm going to quote yourself back because I believe you said in that bargain hunt one that this was worth 2 months' wages.
Yes, we'd worked it out that because it's very no.
So you'd be wanting
so
that year
Symingtons
guarantee.
were not the cheapest on the market.
Right.
They were not the most expensive. They were that middle of the road, and they prided themselves on quality.
So this is cheap for Symingtons, but it was not actually
or
cheap,
cheap for a corset that was going to last you a year.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads me back to, again, I always have these, you know me from various seminars and conferences, I always ask questions of researchers, and even myself, that I can't possibly answer. Because I was thinking, if it's so durable, if it's so thick, do you think that it's too warm? Again, you could just have a personal opinion about that one. Or do you just think it's
I think probably not.
Oh, fantastic.
I mean, on the rare hot day, then you would have been uncomfortable, but that doesn't happen that often in Britain, does it? So
No.
I think majority of the time it might have been quite comfortable, as in, it held you. You would have laced it up so it was comfortable, so it supported but wasn't too tight that you couldn't.
I'm really interested by the label again on the front there that says it's furnished with the new busk protector.
So this is a patented busk protector. Effectively, it's a piece of metal that goes behind the busk around the waist. Mm-hmm. So busks, it's a metal, but it's just a metal strip on both sides with these hooks attached. But they did break. So metal fatigue, constant bending, they tended to snap, and they would snap around that waistline because obviously that's where they're going to get the most wear. So this extra piece of metal that just sits behind just prolongs the life of your busk.
That's clever.
It's really clever. I have a question for you. Could you, for example, I don't know, buy spare parts of corsets and sew in a new one?
Yes, you could. We've got 2 in the collections that have busks that are laced in.
Oh, that's clever.
So that Christopher did say that probably for laundering, so you could take your busk out, but there was still other metal left in the corset. Or it could be when your busk broke. If your busk broke, you could actually replace it yourself, and you didn't have to send it off to a corseteer.
Yeah, because if I was wearing that, I'm not sure that I'd want to lay out another 2 months worth. I'd just be like, let's just get another bit of metal and put it in there.
We've also got one in the collections that was worn. It's slightly later than these. And there's quite a lot of patching going on. There's a lot of mending, which is nice to see.
Yeah. Oh, it vividly reminds me of, God, did I ever stop talking about Elizabeth Gaskell, Hayley? Is there one moment of my life where I'm not talking about that woman? It reminds me of that moment in Wives and Daughters when Mrs. Gibson, who's quite a woman who likes to go above her means, she definitely wants to be of a higher class than she is, and so whenever she buys things, she buys pretty ribbons and stuff to put on the outside, but all of her skirts and all of her corsetry is mended time and time again. It's on its last possible legs, but she will not spend any of the money that she's given on renewing it. She's only interested in sort of outward appearances, so it does remind me of that.
And the dresses that we have in our collections would have been owned by people who were reasonably wealthy.
Yes.
That's why they are still here.
Yes.
a lot of them are darned and mended. And I think that's really quite important. I like to show students that, because you couldn't just thread it. The fabric was expensive. A seamstress was very cheap. A fabric was very expensive. Yeah. And that's why it was remade as many times as you possibly could.
Yeah, and I
mended.
think, and over those years as well, you would have such a sentimental value towards it as well, because you'd just be like, I've had this and it's been mended this many times, and you have like creative solutions to mending as well. I mean, we see that nowadays as sort of like patches and different parts of embroidery that you can do to sort of cover
some
things.
are mended a lot better than others.
Oh no.
Some really poor, really poor sewing on some of them.
Are the corsets generally more carefully repaired, or are they quite kind of solidly repaired?
We've only got one that is repaired, and no. Not really.
No. Oh, okay.
The ones in the Symington collection, I think there's only one that's possibly been worn. The rest are on as new.
Yeah.
They were possibly worn for fashion shows that Symington's did, so they were very keen on not looking back, but they would have somebody dressed in a corset and say, this is what you were wearing 50 years ago, 100 years ago, but this is what we're doing now.
Yeah.
So they were always forward looking. So even in the 80s, when corsets did start to sort of come back for sort of day wear, evening wear, Symington's never really revisited them.
I think that leads quite nicely into your question about corsets in the modern day.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously corsets have kind of, not like this, but just the corset design, the corset shape on t-shirts even, and things like that become quite
everywhere
popular again. Yeah. Which is interesting, considering it has been seen previously as that kind of symbol of, it's something that's really restrictive and women were made to wear them, or it's this really negative symbol of, trying to have unrealistic body and that kind of thing. And there was an article in Vogue last year about that kind of corsets coming back into fashion, and they suggested that when the corsets were underneath your clothes, then they represented that kind of constriction. But now that they're outside, now they're on display, it's kind of the opposite of that, and now it represents kind of embracing.
So you're choosing to wear one.
Yeah. I wonder just what you thought about that generally.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it before, but yes, yeah. I mean, I think until you've put one on, it is quite. They are quite nice. They are. Yeah. They do support you, and you feel quite nice in them.
Yeah, I remember Bernadette Banner did a video on that, because she has, I believe, scoliosis.
Yeah.
So she had to wear something that was quite corset-like as a teenager, and she was kind of explaining that, that wasn't so far away from a corset. It was actually like, because it was designed for her body and it was, sort of structured and pinned up like to fit it, without being too tight. It was a supportive garment more than anything else.
Yeah.
It does. It's interesting how they overlap between that kind of supportive, practical, but also really pretty, because all of these, even the ones that are kind of like, this is for work or this is for sports,
this is for riding, this is gorgeous.
They're made of really beautiful material. They've all got lace at least somewhere, and
yeah, I mean, they're ventilated, so we do have quite a lot in the collections that got the floss work on, which is this embroidery detail, which is, it's decorative, but it's also practical, so it stops the boning moving up and down in the boning channel and rubbing through the fabric. And we know this is cane in here because the floss work has been stitched through.
Oh, yes, the needle can get through it.
Yeah. But the ladies who were doing the floss work were fined a penny for every needle that they broke.
That's very hard.
And they only got paid per dozen motifs, and then obviously depending on the how intricate the design was, how intricate the motif was, depending on how much you got paid. I think I'd have been in deficit by the end of the day.
I break so many needles, not even trying to get through cane. I just break them.
Yeah, it's so thick.
Yes.
Yeah. You would have had to, I think it was all about, obviously not pulling the fabric out before the needles come up, and it's just really thinking about it. And needles were expensive. So you can understand why Symington's did that. This has got a lot of floss work on it, and this, where it joins, where you've got this run of embroidery that joins each floss work across the top, is not really needed at all. That is purely decorative. That.
It is very lovely.
It is, and even the Pretty Housemaid, which was made and marketed directly at Women in Service, has got floss work on the sides.
That's gorgeous! I've never seen it from this angle.
So it's a khaki colour with blue and gold floss work on the sides.
And it's a really bright blue as well, which is actually quite a difficult colour as I understand it to make.
Oh, with the dyes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that
Really
is like it's an extra sort of level of decadence for your 2 months' wages, isn't it?
It really is, because this floss work is purely decorative. It actually doesn't do anything because it doesn't go around the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't go through it. So this is whalebone on the sides. So it wraps around it.
How amazing.
And I guess again, it's that kind of marketing, isn't it? It's like, buy your corset from Symington's, and not only is it going to last you a year and it's very good value, but also it's got that appeal to it because it's a beautiful thing as well.
Yeah, and there's very little boning in it. There's the whalebone on the sides, and then there's metal either side of the eyelets on the back, which you always get, which you need. There's a lot of strain being taken on that back seam, so you need to stay straight. And then there's the busk at the front. The majority of the other support in this is cording. And this cord was paper twine.
Oh.
So it was manufactured by Symington's, and it was fibre-based paper that came in different width strips. And then a machine would twist it, run it through a vat of water and dye, and then it would dry the other end, and it would retain this really tight twist. And we've actually got a corset that's coming apart, really useful. It was coming apart before I came in. And you can see it. I'll get that in a moment. And it's still twisted, even though it's been out of the corset for decades.
That's amazing.
That sounds as though it would actually be quite comfortable as well. I imagine that being, although really strong, quite flexible.
Yeah, it gives a nice, strong but supple fabric.
Okay, so I know that we've discussed, because, you know, as well as doing the podcast, we had the videos, got some baking videos, got some gaming ones, we talked about sewing. Hayley, I'm going to tell you, when I was looking this up last night, if you look up the Pretty Housemaid, the first few hits that come up on the internet are people who've recreated it by hand, using the patterns. And I know that we've spoken about sewing in the past, but it looks like the most endurance work of my life, and we're going to have to buy so many needles should that ever happen. But maybe one day, years in the future, once we've honed all of our skills, we'll make one. We'll do it for you because you're a slighter woman than me, so that'll be less sewing. We'll pop you in it.
Challenge.
Exactly, and you can tell us what it feels like to be in the Pretty Housemaid.
Does it make you feel like a pretty housemaid?
Do you look like the lady on the box cover?
Yes.
She does look very proud of herself.
She's caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror.
Yeah.
And just thought how
elegant
fantastic I look in my Pretty Housemaid course.
Which is particularly clever because obviously from an advertising perspective, then you look at it from both sides, look at the shape that it's giving to her.
Yeah.
It's almost very lady of the house as she sort of moves past, isn't it? It's like, just sort of like walking by, looking at my own reflection.
So Symington's also designed and printed the box tops as well. So they did everything in-house. And they designed box tops for other companies as well.
That's really lovely. The font on that one.
Yeah, some of the artwork is really lovely.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way of really like sort of bringing in as much money as possible with every single element, and you're doing it for other companies. And again, when I was reading that book last night, they also said they did all the laundry in-house as well, and they had their own like boiler house. So like, I've got to show you this part at the end of this book, because it had not occurred to me before how you would get the form down. And they have these copper forms that they shove sort of like heat into, and they put the corsets over them and they like starch them so that they can like get the form.
Yeah, I think the introduction of steam into producing corsets changed the kind of production of them quite a lot, didn't it?
I don't know, actually. I know that the Swiss maidens that you're talking about, they had benches lined up with them. And they would just bolted, and then the steam was shot up inside.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
one, I've just never heard of that
Yeah.
before. That seemed like a real innovation. I was a little bit worried for everybody on sort of the lines, because I was just like, your hands are
It
very
does sound
close to something hot
Yeah.
and
dangerous.
burning.
Yeah. But then Victorian factories weren't exactly known for being.
They
like,
did
health
have
and
they did
safety.
have an infirmary at the factory. Yes.
Oh, they had it.
There is the most okay, we're going off topics. We're a 19th century podcast predominantly, but there is a beautiful picture of the women had their own separate restroom. They had a restroom in 1929, and I looked at that picture and I like saw these two women literally like sitting down with their feet up, and I thought, oh, that's actually quite a nice room. I think I wouldn't mind having that room.
So Perry Gold, who was the daughter. So R is Robert, W.H. is William Henry,
Yes.
who were the two firstborn sons. And then there was Perry Gold. I can't remember where she came in the order, but she was the oldest girl. Anyway, I think there was about 8 or 10 of them. And she had to work for 30 years before they allowed her on the board.
Oh.
But she was in charge of the women. She hired them. She was the one that set up the restroom for them. And she did look after them. By today's standards, you'd think that it wasn't that good, but by standards then, they did look after their workforce. They were renowned for being poor payers, but then manufacturing and sewing particularly didn't pay that well.
Yeah, that's kind of what you expect.
Yeah, but they had restrooms on every floor. They had water fountains on every floor, which sounds really great, and it was, but also it means that your machinist is away from their machine for the least amount of time. They used to allow, because the school day ran shorter than the work day, they would allow the children of their employees to come in and sit with them after school.
That makes a lot of sense. That's really
It does.
John Thornton from North and South. Again, Elizabeth should have taken some notes down.
It does, because they did a lot of oral history with people who worked in Symington's or whose family worked in Symington's, and they were asked, well, how did you, what did you do on your first day with us? Was the training? And they said, well, no, we just started, because they'd sat and watched their parents do it for years.
Yeah, so that's doubly clever actually, because you're kind of sneakily training the next generation of your workforce for free.
Yeah, I think Sissy Abbott was one of the workers there, and she was saying, oh, well, your grandmother had worked there, your mum probably worked there, all your aunts worked there. You spent most of your childhood just sort of around I think it was like, it's called the French room or something.
Yes.
Yes.
French grey. Yeah. So they're all the colours of the corsets.
Oh.
Yeah, and so it's just like you were there and you'd seen it, and so you just sort of went into it.
It was familiar.
Yeah, and I think that we would see maybe Perry Gold as being maybe a bit too matronly and a bit too intrusive in some ways, because I know that there were like some social gatherings, and again Sissy was talking about there were dances, and they were like, if a gentleman dances you to the point where they lifted you off the floor, she'd be right down there telling you absolutely not.
Apparently
None
she
of
used to
that.
sit on a dais at the top, and she'd send somebody down to fetch you. You had to go up, she'd tell you.
But I mean, for the time, quite positive, because again, Elizabeth Gaskell's Ruth, one of the reasons why that all goes to pot really early on, because Ruth is a seamstress. She's just a little seamstress in a cottage, and because the woman doesn't look after her, she doesn't have that matronly role. She doesn't protect her, she doesn't guide her, she doesn't give her any advice. She's basically just a pair of hands working away. That's one of the reasons why she is seduced away, because there isn't that role. So putting it in the context of the time,
to Victorian literature quite a lot, really, doesn't it? Like the danger of not having the protective mother figure to save you from the terrible men.
And to give you some guidance on what is appropriate and what is not appropriate behaviour.
Yeah, the dances were every Saturday night.
Oh, that is regular.
And then they used to take them out for days out as well. And there was a company band. So there was one day when it was icy, and they took the train out to one of the ponds, and they went out skating, and they took the band with them, and they played.
That sounds amazing.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
And there was inter-department football teams as well.
I can imagine that got quite competitive. But that does sound really exciting. So even if you didn't get paid that much, if someone's sort of, shipping you out to, go and have a day on the ice, or to have footballs, or they're sort of hosting dances, I suppose, I mean, pay would be good, but simultaneously, you're not having to lay out additional money to either sort of take time off or to get the train there yourself, or to go to dances further afield than Market Harborough.
This is a complete change of subject.
Go.
The bottom of this corset, and why does it have the kind of ribbons?
Suspenders.
Oh, they're suspenders.
So you start to get suspenders attached to corsets from around the 1900s. Prior to that, you do have suspenders, but they would be on a separate pad that would just hook onto a busk stud.
Yeah.
And to begin with, they are just at the front to hold your stockings up. I don't know whether you've ever worn stockings and suspenders.
No.
Only when I used to act. And
Oh, right, yes. Well,
they don't always have the best things.
They were all back in the 80s when I was at school, so, you wore them. If they're only at the front, well, you basically have a suspender at the front and then on the side, and your back dips down and it becomes actually quite uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
So I can imagine if you've only got them at the front,
yeah,
your back would just literally end up dipping down.
Oh,
obviously not going to be seen, but I would have thought they would have been quite uncomfortable. But if that's all you're used to, then
you don't really think. It's a bit like, I suppose, nowadays, when you have to like pull up your tights, and we haven't really found a solution for tights yet, but it's just something you just like drag it up from around your knees. Yeah,
and then you ladder them when you're halfway up.
Yeah. Where are the technological innovations?
Still a problem.
We've slowed down. But yeah, no, this was the one I was telling you about, because, this is one that isn't based around sort of the front. So the sports corset, you've got the full rotator cuff movement, and you could go for a ride, so it's not coming down over the hip. But we were looking at it and we're like, it's such a beautiful piece.
It is. And actually, one of the things that you were saying is it doesn't look as though, in comparison to other corsets, it would have actually given you any support, because it's a lot lower to allow for that.
It is, but it is all the support around the waistline, and then you've still got the lacing at the back.
I was going to say, I was like, Sarah will be able to tell us how I'm wrong.
So you have still got the lacing at the back, and you've still got the support at the back.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Without it going any further up, how does that work for support in that particular area?
What year are we? 1900?
Yes.
I haven't got some glasses on.
It says 1900.
Thank you. You were starting to get a bust improver.
Oh. We were looking at the most concerning contraption I think I've ever witnessed, the lemon cup.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Is okay. Again, I'm so ready to be proven wrong on this, because
it's as unknown at the moment, so I can't show you. But it's just fantastic. So instead, we've also got ones that are literally just a cotton pad with fabric round them. Well, wool pad with fabric round it that you would just slip inside. Because it was all about proportions. If your bust wasn't as big as it should be for your waist measurement, then you would just you would have extra padding and you would place that in there. The lemon cup is just one step beyond, because that is it's called the lemon cup because apparently it looks like a lemon cut in half from underneath.
Maybe
I struggle with that one. So you would have still had support. You would have also had a chemise underneath, so there would have been something there.
Yeah. I think it's just my quite, I guess, 21st century mentality of like, if it doesn't have straps, it's confusing to imagine how it might function as like an everyday wear.
Really early ones didn't they? They had straps.
Yes.
Kind of really.
Yeah. So 1840s, 1830s, you would have had a strap, and which sat right on the edge.
Oh no! Oh, that annoys me more than anything.
Which is really difficult when you're trying to dress it on a mannequin or a tailor's dummy, because they don't have the shoulders, they have to build up the shoulders. So yeah, they did sit right there, and then they were just tied.
I guess that does make sense with like some of the necklines that you might have worn of an evening, for evening dress.
Off the shoulder, weren't they? Not quite, but
but edging there, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how that kind of came full circle for the undergarment to have straps, and then
they were like, this isn't working out.
And then we ended up with them again.
We've got one from this period that does have straps, called the Queen Bess, and that's got a little bit of like a bustle attached to it as well.
That's
But it's the
exciting.
only one that we have that's sort of a little bit different.
Yeah.
Majority
Whereas
from
it's
this
not the
period
norm.
are this shape. So these would have only come up to nipple line, so they wouldn't have been high,
Ah, okay.
because they didn't need to be. Which
Yeah.
is one with modern day corsets, you tend to find the cut a little bit higher, because you're wearing them as outerwear.
Yeah,
So-
that
Mhm.
makes sense.
And also with the gap at the back, you'll tend to find that people put what they call a modesty panel behind the lacing.
Right.
Because corsets work on the manipulation of flesh, and you can lose a couple of inches on your waist depending on your shape prior. When you put it on, you tend to get a crease down the back,
Oh.
which doesn't look particularly pleasant. So if you're wearing it as outerwear, if you have this modesty panel, then it just covers that up.
Yeah.
And also if you're wearing a skirt or trousers, and your
Mhm.
corset comes down below, then you've basically you can see where your trousers or your corset,
Yeah.
your skirt comes
Mhm.
across the back. Well, this just stops all that.
It smooths everything.
Yes, and it can look quite pretty as well. So if you use different colours or different colour to the lacing, you can really make the lacing pop.
Yeah. Speaking of colour, I really love the colour of this one.
Yeah, the
with
black
the blue.
with the blue. Yeah, so this is the Menzies corset, and I've got the box top for that,
Gorgeous.
which tells you all of the things that you can do in your corset.
Yes, so it just says here, new adjustment recommended by the medical faculty. It was a little bit, wasn't it? The corset adjusts itself to every figure, gives symmetry and comfort to all wearers, can be adjusted in the front when required, the back can be kept perfectly closed. A bust can be replaced by the simple method of lacing, no sewing required, advantages that no other corset has. For golfing, cycling, riding and other sports, the Menzies corset has no equal, to be had in all qualities.
That sounds quite impressive. I was actually imagining that lacing at the front, because it has two panels of lacing. I thought that was decorative, but actually you could use that to adjust it as well.
Yes, yeah. So you've got lacing at the back.
Oh, that is a lot of lacing involved.
It is. I mean, there's a lot of potential adjustment as well. Was that specifically for this one, or were there a lot of corsets that just...
I don't know. We don't have any others in the collection. Only we've got two Menzies ones that are like this. We have others that they look like an ordinary corset, but the busk's laced in, but it's not like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a suggestion of what
Right.
it might be. Again, I don't know, but I'm making a suggestion. Okay, so when I was looking at some of the other advertisements, so there was, it was like a 2-for-1 deal corset called Morn and Noon. And it was like for higher society ladies, it seems. So like you had something for your morning dress, you had something for your noon dress if you're a woman who's changing several times a day. And I was just thinking, this does seem like, I suppose, like an early version of like sports support. So if it can go for all these different activities, you might need to adjust it in different ways. So it's like for golf, you might be a little more, I don't know, straightened up at the back and like a little more loose at the front so you can bend. But if you're horse riding, I don't know, you might straighten it. I've never ridden a horse, and you can tell. So
But yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah, so all in one
Yeah.
situation is my suggestion.
For somebody who maybe does different kinds of sports, or you look at that and you think, oh, it doesn't matter that I want to do horse riding instead of golf, because I can still use that
Yeah.
and adjust it.
That's my guess, at least my uneducated guess.
I think unless you do all of those sports and you try it out, then you will never know.
Put it down as the second sewing goal. This is getting out of control. We have to find a horse. We have to someone to teach me how to ride a horse.
Or just make it fit somebody who rides a horse.
Yeah.
As long as they can also, let's have a little
Golf.
look. Yeah, golf and cycle and quote unquote other sports unknown. I have to find some Victorian sports.
Yeah. Also, never really thought before about how cycling becoming more of a thing for women than probably, well, it did change the fashion because it changed the skirts, but I never really thought about how you might have to consider your corset if you wanted to go out and ride a bike.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I don't ride a bike, but as I understand, there's a lot of bending involved. What if your wheel goes wrong and you have to bend down and fix something? I mean, hopefully, personally, I hope I just have somebody there and be like, something's happened to you,
Help.
please help. Please assist immediately. But it's, again, really beautiful with like the black and the blue, and I really like this kind of like heart-shaped ones at the top.
That is really pretty.
It
You can't see the I'm going to use the wrong word for this now, but the kind of bones or beads or
the boning channels. So this is manufactured slightly differently to the ventilated. So the ventilated does have boning channels stitched on the top. These are stitched in as you make the corset. You create the channels.
That sounds as though it would be more difficult to create. Maybe not if you're.
Yeah, I think once you've sorted your pattern out, they're absolutely fine. If you're making for somebody, they're really difficult to alter. These are really easy to alter.
But that might be more of a challenge.
But when they're mass manufacturing something, then all of that's all sorted, all your pattern sorted. So manufacturing-wise, I think once they've got it all set up, then probably there's no difference.
This one looks in such perfect condition as well. Is this one that was never worn?
Yeah, no, this hasn't been worn. They don't look like this after they've been worn.
Particularly if you're doing all of this activity.
After your horse ride.
Which you would have to if you purchased it.
If I purchased it, it would be like buying a gym membership. It's like, I've got to go ride a horse. I better call up the girls for some golf.
It is incredible though, isn't it? Just to think, as a Victorian lady, you might have gone to the shop and seen exactly this in its box to choose your corset. And there it is, still perfect today.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot describe to you how perfect it is. Okay, the best way I can describe it is, do you see the eyelets? Do you see how shiny they are? Because I have so many eyelets and so many things, and I take it out once. Tarnished, rusted, gone. This is beautiful.
And they're still in the fabric as well.
Yes. Perfectly put in. The black is so black, the blues are so blue, not a stitch out of place. But I am kind of glad that I don't have to wear one when I do the sports. That might...
I think I'd rather cycle without a corset on. That is true.
In an ideal world.
The next one's a riding corset.
Specifically
riding, yes.
So this is the one that's got the kind of really high edges to go, so your legs can move?
Yes. So that you're sitting there with your legs up and, the corset's not in the way.
It does.
So it's longer at the front and then cuts away at the side seams and at the back.
It's not your kind of corset shape that you imagine. Like the one next to it is kind of, I think, what most people picture when they think of the shape of a
very
corset.
straight.
Yeah. So we're slightly later here. So we're 1905.
Yes, correct.
Edwardian. So with our shapes changed. So we're now into the S-bend shape.
Yes.
Oh, right.
So the corset's shapes change a little bit. So instead of creating that small waist, it's all about the hips and having hips. So the pattern cutting changes.
Again, I have a question that nobody could possibly know the answer to without one of us putting it on and getting a horse. Procuring a horse and then leaving an industrial estate.
Yeah, unlikely.
Very scientific. Because I'm looking at it and, obviously there's cuts into the hips so you can get onto the horse. But every single time I look at it, I've read about it, they still mention riding side saddle. And I was thinking, I wonder if you could fully just get over a horse without having to do side saddle. Because your hips still have to be quite out to do side saddle because you're pootling along.
I feel like you could.
Again, I think you could with that one.
I'm confidently saying I think I could get on a horse in that corset.
Luckily, listeners, Hayley will never have to prove this. Yeah, because I was just thinking about how, it might have changed even more had, other social aspects of the world changed and, ladies sitting more, what would you call it?
It's a stride.
A stride, that's it. I was not about to say that, and I'm so glad that you stepped in.
On the note for this one, it says that it has duplex whaleboning. What does that mean?
Yeah, just two sets next to one another. So there's two strips together.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that'll have you firm in as you're riding along.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say this one looks like it's quite soft, but actually, now that you pointed that out, I don't think it is that soft, is it?
No, this section isn't at all. You've got,
But the upper.
yeah, you've got gussets there, and then it still laces at the back. So this would have come down, so your waist's about there. So you've then got those little gussets that would just
it's
be
quite a
over your
lot
hip.
higher at the back than I would imagine, but I guess because you have to be, that part of your body has to be quite strong and flexible if you're riding. Again, I'm assuming, because I sound like I've never seen a horse, don't I? I sound like I don't understand, but in theory.
But it would still keep your back straight.
Yes.
So it would help with your posture.
Can we... Sorry,
I was just going to say, from the back especially, in comparison, you can really see how much shorter that is.
This back section, this period, from the 1890s, you always get it going up at the back.
Oh my goodness.
And I was quite confused about this, as to why this was, and I asked a crosseteer when she came, and it was to smooth out your back fat.
Oh.
And it works.
That does make sense, actually.
It really works.
Make a note of that one.
Yeah, if you can imagine if it's dipped at the back, which
Yeah.
you do tend to find when you're moving into the 1900s, then they get lower at the back, and it just sits under where your bra strap comes, whereas these go that little bit higher.
I can almost feel it on my skin as you're saying it. I can kind of feel it against my
So
shoulder
it just
blades and how that would
smooth everything out, and you're less likely to get that roll of fat over the top.
That's why everyone looks so incredible, Hayley. It was all just like smoothed down.
Yeah. Like shapewear today.
Yes.
And then you'd have worn a corset cover over the top to smooth everything off, and then you'd have worn your bodice over the top of that, which more than likely, if it needed it, it definitely would have extra padding sewn into the bodice.
A lot of thought went into exactly
creating that shape.
Yeah.
Yes.
And all the different purposes, and also not just is it a fit to the purpose, but also how can we make that fit to purpose thing beautiful so that women want to buy it and wear it. And all of these are really gorgeous.
I think also you have to remember that there were so many other corsets on the market at the same time. So yes, you did need to make yours stand out a little bit and make it a little bit pretty. Yes, nobody other than the wearer would probably see it, but you know.
Yeah.
My grandma always used to say, you feel good if you've got nice underwear on.
Yeah.
So I think it's really nice that actually, although a lot of the designers were men, that they realised that we do want something that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, particularly you spend 2 months' wage, you don't want something utilitarian.
No. And although that sort of is, it isn't.
I feel like there's enough of it being utilitarian that you're like, no, this is an investment piece. I am using my wages wisely.
A sensible purchase.
It's a sensible purchase, but it's nice enough that you're just like, no, I won't hate it every single time I use it.
It's the lace around the top. You can slot coloured ribbon through as well.
That's beautiful. I'm so excited for when you take a picture of that.
That is such a nice idea. And even the advert, again, it's just like, from the image of the woman looking in the mirror, you're supposed to feel in that, like, I like the way I look.
Yes, and also obviously the box top and the box side, which is so this would have been on the side. That's That's what purchaser would have seen in the shop. So if you've got a lovely decorated box, you can say, "Oh, can I look at that one?"
Yeah.
And I really liked they've even put the word housemaid in it, because if you were a housemaid or someone in domestic service walking by, you'd be like, "Oh, this is very specifically made for me." It would be quite, I suppose, like a nice moment, because a lot of other corsets we've not got really much, but they seem to be more like, be a lady, sort of be fancy almost in some of the examples that we've seen, whereas this is like, be yourself still, but you can still wear something beautiful and practical that is designed with you in mind.
Yeah, and also it's stamped with the Pretty Housemaid, just in case you wanted to buy another one but had forgotten what it was.
Although I do wonder if that would rub off.
I think in time, yes.
Sarah went to take another item out of storage for us so that we could see a damaged corset, which was fraying, so that we could see the many layers and components that it was made up of, which also happened to be another ventilator corset.
So this is the one that's coming apart, but it's also one with the laced-in busk.
Oh, how wonderful! Oh, there's like eyelets all over the centerpiece of it.
So you just undone that. slipped your busk out. So it's made slightly differently. So you're there's normally a seam on the edge here,
Right.
Where you're,
but they've just sort of like
they've just done like a buttonhole really.
Yeah. Yeah. This seems like it would be really useful for like if certain parts of it either broke or needed laundered. Now,
I think that's what it was for. Probably more breaking than laundry.
Right.
You've still got metal eyelets, so these ventilation eyelets.
I was just about to say, what are the eyelets for? They are for ventilation.
oh,
I don't know how well they would work.
I think we're in a anything you can get kind of situation. Oh my goodness, that truly is coming undone.
So that is your paper twine.
Right, yeah, the paper twine you were talking about.
And you can also see there's actually a third layer inside. So you've got your top layer fabric, your lining, and then an inner fabric of hessian.
I thought so.
So
that is sturdy, isn't it?
Yeah. So the Pretty Housemaid has it, because when you look at it, you could just see sort of slight wrinkling on the surface. They used it quite a bit until about the 1890s, and then started to. You don't see it quite so much. So they use hessian, and they also used felt. Hessian seems to be better. Whether the felt started to come away inside, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's one of those things you need to try it, wouldn't you? You need to try it too. And I also had a corsetarian, and she'd actually tried. She got an industrial machine, and she actually made one with an interior of hessian. And she said she would never ever do it again.
Oh no!
It was really, really tough to work with those 3 layers. But again, it was to strengthen the fabric.
Yeah, you can really see how strong it would have been with like the thickness of the cross section of that.
Yeah, I felt like that one would have survived quite a lot of your day-to-day manoeuvres.
We hope you enjoyed coming along on our trip to the Symington archive. Once again, a massive thank you to Sarah for guiding us through a wonderland of historical dress. Join us next time for our 3rd and final road trip this summer, where we'll be going on an excursion to Elizabeth Gaskell's house in Manchester. See you then!